Yes, behind me. I'm Sally Altman, my husband, Dick Weiss. I'm a member of the JCRE Steering Committee and the chair of today's meeting. Dick and I are founders of Before Ferguson, Beyond Ferguson, which is a racial equity storytelling project. We've recruited a diverse team of writers, photographers, videographers, and presentation specialists to do the work. Over the past 2 years, the group has presented stories in serial fashion about families living in the Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood and the trials they've faced during this pandemic. We've got a full meeting today, really packed agenda. We have a number of special guests and a lot of information to share. We'll be focusing on the racial equity implications of many of the items being discussed in the Missouri General Assembly, and the best way that we as JCRE and you as individuals and as representatives of many organizations can participate in that advocacy effort. So please take a moment, if you haven't done it, to type your name into the chat. And if you're representing an organization, let me know also in that identification. So our first report is from the co-chair of our advocacy committee, Nancy Solomon Deloge. Nancy attended the JCPA, Jewish Council of Public Affairs Delegate Assembly meeting last week, and that meeting was focused on racial equity. JCPA is a national organization, and our JCRC is a member in that organization, along with other JCRC organizations across the country. So JCPA provides resources and sets a national community relations agenda. Nancy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Sally. So the meeting was really, really cool. And the best takeaway that I got was that a lot of the work that we are doing here at JCRE is dovetailing specifically with some of the platforms of the JCPA. And I think that's really cool. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, just kind of outline generally what the JCPA platform on racial equity is. So what among their priorities, criminal justice, which is rehabilitative and restorative justice that focuses on social services, things like education and housing and healthcare instead of mass incarceration. And that dovetails very well into what one of our priorities happens to be, which is pretty terrific. They're focusing too on economic opportunity, working to eliminate poverty and to remove barriers that historically have prevented marginalized groups from accumulating wealth. They're working on education, preschool, through robust after-school programs and expanded extracurriculars. That kind of ties in somewhat with our priority on teaching truth in education and in history, which some people call critical race theory, which isn't really critical race theory, so we're not calling it that. We're talking about teaching truth in education. They're focusing in on environmental justice, the right to live in an environment that is safe, which is one of the topics of one of our 200 level courses that we plan to offer that we'll probably hear more about today. They're focusing in on health, accessible healthcare that includes mental health, on housing, and on jobs, working and earning a living wage, right to collective bargaining, unionizing, and that kind of thing. They're also working on voting rights. And of course, as we know, that is something that is very much a priority here as we take a look at the stuff that our General Assembly is doing that could undermine the ability of folks to get to the polls and be able to share their voices. So I can touch a little bit on some of the cool things that other organizations are doing. A lot of them have organizations that are outreach groups that target Black and Jewish kids, putting them together and as they learn about each other, which is a similar program to cultural leadership that is here. Anyway, one idea that I really liked to encourage encourage community outreach was volunteering directly for an organization. Like folks might want to get involved in Big Brothers, Little Brothers, or something like that for that hands-on experience to start address some of the social justice things that we all stand for. Anyway, I'm gonna stop now because I know we got a lot to go over. Any questions, feel free to message me in the chat and I'll get back to you.
I was having a conversation with myself. Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate it. Will you back up just a little so I can read your t-shirt? And it says,
It says, if you thought I was a nasty woman before, buckle up, Buttercup.
Good for you. Wonderful. Thank you. At our last meeting in October, we discussed 3 educational conferences that we've been planning. As always, the best laid plans don't always come to fruition exactly as we intended, but they do create other opportunities. I'd like to ask Alyssa Banford to provide an update on upcoming educational programming. Please, Alyssa.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this snowy day. I am going to be really brief because, as Nancy mentioned, we have an absolutely incredible program today with some fantastic guests, so I don't want to take up too much time. What we were planning on doing with the 200th level conference was to get ahead of the bills this session. With the first conference session being planned around teaching truth in history, or critical race theory, as some people are calling it. So as you may know, that bill has already been heard. While we still think there's incredible importance in making sure we know the ins and outs of what we're talking about when we talk about teaching truth in history, we don't see the need to hold a 3-session course. But what we do want to make sure is that we are holding an educational session and a town hall to make sure that there's a good understanding of what's going on in the Jewish community and what could potentially come down the line here in Missouri. The programming committee is going to be working on a town hall like program with some incredible experts. We actually have, due to the incredible expertise of the people who are on the programming committee who have been forced in different directions, we found ourselves needing more people to sit on the programming committee. So if you are interested in helping us plan this effort, please reach out to me, reach out to Tony, who apologizes he couldn't be here. There was a last-minute program scheduled with Hillel, so he wasn't able to join us today to give this update himself. But we do plan on moving forward with a 200 level conference session on environmental justice and racism in April. So stay tuned for more information on that, but I look forward to receiving your emails saying that you'd like to join us in planning our programming and educational efforts. I'll turn it back to you, Sally.
Thanks, Alyssa. Appreciate it. Now I'm so pleased to welcome State Senator Brian Williams to our meeting. He serves as the Assistant Minority Leader for the Senate and represents a large portion of North and Central St. Louis County. His full bio is at the bottom of the agenda that we shared with you, so you can look for more details. Last year, Senator Williams sponsored a sweeping criminal justice reform bill that was signed into law. This year, he's working on additional proposals that were not included into last year's bill that he'd like to share with us. But before I turn the floor over to you, Senator Williams, I personally, and on behalf of the JCRE and the JCRC, want to thank you for your powerful and brave stance against a recent Senate bill, SB 666, nicknamed Shoot First. We appreciate your leadership in working to ensure that this bill does not move out of committee. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Sally, and I appreciate that introduction. You know, it's one of those things where I think as elected officials, it's our job to really let our bio speak through our work and our record. So, you know, I really appreciate you just really kind of directing it more to allowing me, and I hope other leaders talk about what we've done to make our state better and not what we have as just accomplishments to really promote ourselves. For those who don't know me, State Senator Brian Williams. And you know, as I think about this snowy day, I'm looking out the window and I'm watching all the snow comes down. We still can't lose focus of the fact that making our community safer for every family, business, and individual should be some of our highest priorities in Jefferson City. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity just to update you on some of our efforts. And I'll just cut straight to the point. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless other Black men and women, they simply should be alive today. And we all know that we can't bring them back, but we can prevent further deaths by passing reasonable police reforms that protect Missourians. And that's what I want to talk about with you today. The common sense reforms that we can make right now to improve public safety right here in the state of Missouri. So as Sally stated earlier, last year, we took an important step forward. We passed comprehensive police reform that did several things. Banned police chokeholds, like the kind that killed George Floyd in Minneapolis. We required Missouri law enforcement agencies to report use of force incidents, and we now have one of the strongest use of force databases in the country. We strengthened protections for officers who report misconduct. We also allowed prosecutors or circuit attorneys to file a motion to vacate convictions if a person was convicted and actually innocent. And that led to the release of a gentleman who had been in prison for 43 years by the name of Kevin Strickland. But it also helped with cases like Lamar Johnson, a man who's been in prison for more than 25 years for a crime law enforcement knows he did not commit. We achieved this success by building support, and it wasn't by stoking division. You know, we worked with various groups and advocates, the NAACP, clearly the JCRC, the National Association of Social Workers, Empower Missouri. We worked with law enforcement. We worked with activists. We worked with so many folks throughout the entire state. And as a result of that, that bill is now law. But there's still more that we can do to improve public safety. So we're continuing to move forward. I filed a bill this year, which would ban no-knock arrest warrants, like the one involved in the killing of Breonna Taylor. But we have instances right here in St. Louis County, where I live and represent, where a woman had her door kicked in and her dog was shot and killed due to a no-knock arrest warrant for an unpaid utility bill. You know, these type of warrants put police officers and innocent bystanders' lives in danger. Several states have banned or significantly limited the use of no-knock arrest warrants, including Florida, Kentucky, Virginia, Utah, and others. And it's time for Missouri to do the same. I've also filed legislation this year to help protect the integrity of our police departments by strengthening officer licensure. So in Missouri, every single police officer must be licensed by the Peace Officer Standards and Training Program, which is also called POST. And the POST program also licenses police training centers, police academy instructors, and it approves law enforcement training curriculum. So last week, Sandy Carson, the director of the Missouri Department of Public Safety, which oversees POST, testified that her department recently investigated allegations that a law enforcement officer pointed a gun at his son's head while intoxicated. Now, that same officer was also intoxicated during, quote, multiple incidents of domestic disturbances. And the state wanted to suspend that officer's license, but current law would not allow it because these horrible acts of violence occurred when he was off duty. It was not an isolated incident. Another officer was accused of soliciting sex from juveniles. And once again, the state was prohibited from suspending that officer's license because the officer was off duty when the alleged behavior occurred. So to protect the integrity of this honored profession, which I still believe is, we must strengthen the state's ability and responsibility to revoke or suspend the license of any officer who engages in dangerous or illegal activity, whether they're on the clock or not. So what my bill would allow is the Missouri Director of Public Safety to apply the same discipline that currently exists for on-duty police officers to their off-duty behavior. The legislation has bipartisan support and the support of several law enforcement agencies. At a legislative hearing on this bill, we had the sheriffs of Platte County, Jefferson County, Greene County, and Springfield testify in support. We also had law enforcement leaders from the Columbia Police Department, Lincoln University's Police Department, University City's Police Department, and the Mexico, Missouri Department of Public Safety testify in support. This is a great bill that would keep our community safe. It'll keep police officers safe, and it'll protect the integrity and ensure the trust of this profession. Before I take questions, I want to again thank all of you for just having me here today to talk about these issues. And I know sometimes our country and our community seem deeply divided, but I truly believe there's more that unites us than divides us. And I want to be clear when it comes to issues, especially dealing with law enforcement. This isn't an us versus them situation. There is a broad bipartisan support for these type of reforms. And there is a huge majority of police that would welcome these reforms to keep their officers safe. And America, I believe, is calling out for change. And these bills will help answer that, and most importantly, help save lives, because public safety, police reform, keeping our communities safe, they shouldn't be partisan positions. They truly should be common goals that we all share. So again, thank you for the opportunity. It's always great to be with your group, and welcome any questions.
Hi, Senator Williams. This is Cheryl. You can't see me, but you can hear me. We do have one question in the chat that said, could this help regulate those officers that are registered members of active or active in white supremacist groups?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think what this does is provide an unprecedented level of transparency for the state, as well as the Department of Public Safety, to really go after anyone that's engaging in any inappropriate behavior while they're off duty. So when folks are going and doing things like the insurrection we saw, storming the Capitol last January, if there were any members of law enforcement there from the state of Missouri, they would be under an investigation, and they would be in threat of losing their license once that investigation is concluded. So I do believe that this would address members of law enforcement that are registered or engaged in any white supremacist or discriminatory groups.
We have a question that says, if you had to pick 2 to 3 bill areas where our support could really make a difference in Jefferson City, what would they be?
One thing I'll say, your organization's done a tremendous job coming up and testifying on behalf of bills, and really taking an unprecedented stance in terms of support. Cheryl was there testifying for 2 days on multiple bills. I ran into her in many different committee hearings and in the hallways. So I think you all are doing your part. I think there's going to be a time where there may be a call to action. But let me be clear about this. And this is something that I talk about with a lot of folks as lawmakers. When I ran for state senate, I ran because I really got tired of Democrats and Republicans fighting each other and not getting anything done. As lawmakers, it's our job to work through the process, but pull you in to support the issues to really bring that as general information to the larger community. But in terms of passing laws and getting things done, that's what you elected me for. So I'll focus on that. And if there's any call to action we need to make, we'll love for you to have you kind of bring that to the community and make sure folks know what these bills are doing and how they're impacting our state.
I do see one more question, which is something we could spend a lot of time talking about, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it. But SB 666, which we're going to be putting out an alert about after this meeting today, is this awful shoot first legislation. I think maybe if we could just hear from you, not necessarily about the specifics of the legislation, but what do you think its trajectory is? Is it going to get out of committee? And if so, what do we need to do?
Yeah, one, the bill, and I would say this particular piece of legislation is one of the most offensive pieces of legislation I've ever seen in my life. I was truly insulted by it. To think that I sat in a committee hearing and got into a senseless debate with Mark McCloskey about legislation that would pretty much give someone the right to shoot someone, kill them, and not have any type of consequence for their actions. I immediately thought about the three gentlemen who was the exception in Georgia to be sent to prison for murdering a Black man. Under this law would have gotten away with it and went scot-free. And that's exactly what that bill does. That bill is basically eliminating a murderer of any type of responsibility or consequences for a crime that they committed. Again, I stressed to the bill sponsor that it was by far one of the most offensive, one of the most racist bills that I've ever seen in my life. And to the extent that him and I had a conversation, I think has led to us agreeing that we probably maybe need to stay away from each other for a while. So it's Senate Bill 666. I don't even know how it got that number, but that should tell you that it's evilness within itself, just by the bill title and the bill number. Again, to have someone like Mark McCloskey use that bill to promote himself and continue to create the divisiveness that we've seen with the previous administration, what we've seen promoted by a United States Senator on January 6th when we had an insurrection, is unbelievable. It's indescribable on how offended I was, and I'm prepared to do everything that I need to do to ensure that that bill doesn't go into law. Law enforcement testified in opposition of it. There were members on both sides of the aisle that knew that this bill would not be good for our state, and to think that we have members in the body who are running for higher office that are using this to deceive folks as if this is mutually exclusive to the Second Amendment, when it's nothing but allowing legalized murder in the state of Missouri.
Are there any other questions, Cheryl?
I just want to pop on for a second. I listened to that hearing and I heard a heartbreaking story about a family in Crawford County, which is not that far from here. It's where Cuba and Bourbon and Steelville are, where their adult son, 28, out in his pajama bottoms helping a neighbor chase a dog down, was killed by his neighbor who was concerned about him for self-defense, and the neighbor has gotten off, not even charged. So this is happening even without this awful bill. And we as JCRE need to learn more about some of these issues that are actually happening out there so we can continue to have a loud voice. So as sad as I was to meet the Kings, I hope we can find a way to amplify their tragic story to let people know what's going on out there in terms of racist law enforcement.
Yeah, and keep in mind when Justin was killed, he was just 28 years old, and he was living in Crawford County. because he wanted to be close to his daughter. And to think that making those sacrifices and ended up losing his life, it was a very troubling testimony from his parents. And again, I mean, this is the same bill sponsor that sponsored the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which would nullify federal gun laws in the state of Missouri. Clearly, law enforcement hands are tied now. So we have a case that they have in Cape Girardeau, Missouri now, which is basically a gentleman who got caught with an assault rifle, convicted felon, was able to turn around and sue the police department for confiscating his firearm. So those are the consequences that come with some of these draconian policies that we allow to come through the legislature. And again, you know, in my opinion, you know, I've made a decision to kind of be the elected leader that just really call it out for what it is and not really play to the you know, the partisan rhetoric. But you got extremes that are really pushing their party to take a side in order to pander to a base of people in our state, which is allowing us to really focus on policies that doesn't move Missouri forward, but ultimately set us back.
Thank you, Senator Williams. We appreciate all you're doing in the state Senate. And I want you to know that later on during this meeting, we're going to discuss how we can best advocate on behalf of yours and racial equity issues.
Yeah, and then I'm going to have Sally, my staff, they'll put in our information to contact me if you want to talk further about any of these things. We'll also put my website address in there so you can see things that we're focused on and be able to follow these pieces of legislation. Even though it's an election year and it's really tough in the legislature, I feel really confident that we'll get these bills across the finish line. And again, the support of all of you is the reason why we've been able to be successful with a lot of these pieces of legislation, especially as a Democrat in the super minority. I see my friend and neighbor, Steve Skranker on here. And I remember Steve was like, man, there's no way in the hell you're going to get that bill passed. And we somehow figured it out. And it was really, truly because of the support of all of you. So it's always great to be with you. Stay warm, stay safe. And again, I look forward to talking to you also.
Thanks so much. Next up is a good friend of JCRC, Jeff Smith and Cheryl Edelstein are going to be discussing a few more issues in the General Assembly, including congressional redistricting, threats to the initiative petition, and bills aimed to limit what can be taught in public schools. Just listing all those issues and knowing that this is being discussed in our state is heartbreaking. So Jeff is a former state senator and is currently representing the Missouri ACLU in Jeff City, as well as serving as the executive director of the Missouri Workforce Housing Association. Jeff, it's great to see you again. Oh, you're muted.
All right. Hey, it's good to see you too, Sally, and great to hear from Senator Williams. Can people hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. Well, let me, why don't we start by talking a little bit, thanks for having me. Why don't we start by talking a little bit about congressional redistricting? I know I see Deb Price and Steve Skranka and probably some other attorneys on the call. So I'm not an attorney, just playing one for the purposes of this Zoom call. So feel free to correct me if I get any of the law wrong here, but I'll do the best I can. So to understand kind of where we are with congressional districting in Missouri right now, I think it's important to understand the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965, and a core provision of that Voting Rights Act, it was the Section 5 pre-clearance requirement. And basically what that did was it prohibited certain jurisdictions that had a history of racial discrimination from implementing any change affecting voting without getting pre-approval from the Department of Justice to make sure that any new change wouldn't discriminate against protected minorities. So that was a key component of what we did in 1965. And that was extended in 1982 by Congress. And it was always extremely bipartisan until 2013, when the US Supreme Court held that you could no longer have these certain sections of the country that had to submit any changes in their any legislative or policy changes affecting voting. You could no longer require them to pre-clear it with Washington, D.C. and the Department of Justice. So that was a big change. One thing you've seen since that change, and you saw it before the change attempted, but you've seen it more, I think, since then, is attempts to dilute the minority vote, in particular the Black vote, in formerly covered jurisdictions that would have, in previous times before that Supreme Court decision, would have had to pre-clear those changes with the Department of Justice, no longer have to do so. So what do these attempts at diluting the Black vote look like? There's three main ways people have done it, and they're colloquially referred to as packing, stacking, and cracking. So what does that mean? Packing means diluting the minority vote by packing as many minorities as possible into overwhelmingly minority districts. So it can't really be done as effectively in Missouri as it's done in places like Mississippi or Alabama with a higher percentage of Black voters. It's done to some extent in Missouri, in the St. Louis area. But what packing means is trying to makes like one district in a state 70, 80, even 90% Black, so that Black votes are wasted, right? Because if one district is 90% Black, of course it's going to elect a Black representative, but then Black voters cannot have any influence in any surrounding districts. So that's called packing. A second way is called stacking, and that's stacking Black voters into, like, say 40% Black districts. And this is done particularly in areas with extremely racially polarized voting. Stacking Black voters into districts that are, say, 30, 35, even 40% Black, so that the interests of Black voters typically will not, they won't typically be able to elect a candidate of their choice, because they'll always be stuck at, like, 35, 40, 45% of the vote without being able to win. So that's stacking. And then a third tactic to dilute the minority vote, particularly the Black vote, is called cracking. And that's particularly relevant to the debate right now in Missouri politics, because there's an attempt by some segments of the Republican Party, led by none other than, I hate to even bring him up on a call with progressive Jewish people, but Eric Greitens, who's helping kind of foment a Republican on Republican war to try to force the legislature to redraw the congressional districts, so that instead of being 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats, it's 7 Republicans and just 1 Democrat. So he's leading that effort. So let me back up a tiny bit. In 1986, the Supreme Court decided, a case was decided that eventually went up to the Supreme Court, and it came out of North Carolina, I believe, Thornburg versus Gingles, and it laid out 3 criteria for having a minority group have a district that is drawn to elect a candidate of their choice. It said that group must be large and compact enough to be able to constitute a majority in a district. It must be a politically cohesive group, and they must be able to demonstrate that they could defeat a candidate of the other, of the other, group, the majority group. The 1st congressional district is the only district in the state of Missouri that is covered under the Voting Rights Act and meets those criteria. So the first CD is Representative Cori Bush's congressional district, and that is it's a 49.5% Black congressional district. Within the Democratic primary voters, it's majority Black. And that district will have to stay, it cannot be diluted, the Black vote cannot be diluted. But the other district in Missouri represented by a Black congressperson, the 5th congressional, which is Emanuel Cleaver's district in Kansas City, that's the district that's most in play right now, because those Republicans led by Eric Greitens are saying, let's crack that district. Let's crack Kansas City's Black vote and progressive white vote up 3 ways so that the northern edge is put into Sam Graves' congressional district that covers northern Missouri. The southern edge would be put into probably the district that covers southwest Missouri, like Springfield. And then the east side of Kansas City would be grouped in with the district that Vicky Hartzler currently represents. So it would dilute the Black vote by splitting Kansas City 3 ways and putting parts of the district in 3 Republican districts where the Black residents and the white progressives of Kansas City would no longer be able to elect, anyone remotely reflecting their views. So that's kind of what the debate is right now on redistricting. Now, you probably are asking what's going to happen. So I'll give my best estimate of what I think will happen, and then I'd love to hear, well, of course, Senator Williams, a little bit closer to the situation than I am, and Cheryl will probably have some thoughts as well. Right now, the leadership of both chambers is set on getting a 6-2 match. The reason they're doing that is with any great charity towards Democrats. It's not because they agree with how Emanuel Cleaver votes. It's mostly because the incumbent Republican Congress people don't really want to fly back and forth and campaign very hard. They want to have districts that are as safe as possible and districts that are as familiar to them as possible. So they don't really want to start from scratch and draw a new 7-1 map, because they're afraid that the Republican margins in their districts in a 7-1 map will go down from being maybe a Republican plus 20 district to a Republican plus 10 district, and they won't be insulated if there's a Democratic wave election. So that's why the 6, Republican incumbents, 2 of whom are running for US Senate, but really the 4 who are running for re-election for Congress don't want a 7-1 map. They just want it as close to what they currently have as possible. So that's the debate. There's in particular a couple senators from St. Charles, Bob Onder and Bill Eigel, who don't like the fact that St. Charles is split. Right now, Jefferson County is split in the current map that we're operating under for the last 10 years. And the Speaker of the House is from Jefferson County. He wants to see Jefferson County, instead of being split into 3 congressional districts, unified in 1 congressional district. That way, a potential candidate from Jefferson County, maybe the current speaker someday, would have a unified county as a base, as a large percentage of the vote in any new congressional district. So he's got Jefferson County in 1 single district. These 2 St. Charles senators don't like St. Charles County being split up for the same reason. At least one of them definitely wants to run for Congress, and they want St. Charles all in 1 congressional district, so they'll have a unified base. So it's a little bit, excuse me, of a pissing match kind of between Jefferson County and St. Charles. What I predict will happen is that they'll find a way to have a 6-2 map, but include St. Charles, unify St. Charles within Ann Wagner's 2nd congressional district. So I'm sorry if that was too esoteric. I think probably some people are probably following along, and for others, it's too inside baseball to really kind of get all those nuances, but that's my estimate of where I think things are. Cheryl and Senator Williams?
Jeff, I would just say that exceeded my expectation. That's why we have a political science professor here talking, because I learned a lot. And it really did explain the racial equity implications of redistricting, which is really what we wanted to get to. I'd be interested if Senator Williams has anything he wants to add, since he's in the middle of all of this. I think Jeff was able to talk about it in a way that maybe Senator Williams can't. But anything you want to add, Senator Williams?
Yeah, I think I'm the only person in the legislature that's elected that's been a part of a congressional redistricting before. So I don't know. No, my only stance with it, I serve on the redistricting committee. We have a 60-40 electoral split in the state of Missouri. And I just said, well, if the extreme Republicans want a 7-1 map, as Democrats, we should be pushing for a 5-3. And that's my stance on it. I'm hoping that we can capitalize off the infighting of the Republican Party and, lightning strikes at times. So it'll be interesting to see how it shapes up. But I think we end up with a 6-2 map. I think right now the biggest issue is going to be the St. Louis region. Ann Wagner's trying to hold the line to avoid her district going into St. Charles County or potentially Jefferson County. For her, opens up a primary of someone who could run to the right of her. So she's trying to find that middle ground, and it'll be determined whether or not she can hold that line, or legislature goes one direction, north or south, and change the demographics of her district a little bit. So we'll see. The only thing I really care about is making sure that we protect Democratic districts, and if we have an opportunity to pick up another one, we should go for it.
Thank you both on that. So Jeff, we've got about 5 more minutes that I want to spend on this section of the meeting. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the initiative petition. And before we go too far in talking about it, I want to stick in the chat a Facebook post. So a large group, 9 or 10 Jewish organizations are actually coming together to do a program on the initiative petition on February 16th, a Zoom-based program. I thank our friends at Sheremoth and CRC for picking up the ball on that and making it happen. JCRC is a co-sponsor. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what the initiative petition is and what some of these proposals are. And what I'd love just to get from you is your thought about the why. Why is it that we're seeing, 60+ bills on trying to change the initiative petition and constitutional amendments? I mean, the specifics of them are kind of not as important as the why. Why is this happening, and what, as advocates, can we do about it?
Good, Jeff, you can start off with that. And we should have Jeff teach a civics course for some of my colleagues that want to nullify gun laws.
Okay, so my kids are on a snow day, and they were being a little outspoken themselves for part of that question. So I heard the part about the initiative petitions and why are there so many bills on this?
Yeah.
And
why are they doing this? What's the why?
So let me just break it down and make it very simple. The last 3 or 4 things that passed on initiative petitions are actually 4 of the last 5 things. The increase in the minimum wage, the legalization of medical marijuana, the expansion of Medicaid, and the First Clean Missouri initiative were all anathema to almost every elected Missouri Republican in the legislature. So they don't like it very much when other people can get on the ballot and overturn the things that they do, or bring new ideas into policy that they have suppressed for years and years and years successfully. They don't like that. Direct democracy, they talk about government being closest to the people, being best, but when it actually came to direct democracy, expanding, healthcare for people in need, then they didn't like it as much. So I think that's the reason you see all these attempts to increase the thresholds that petitions need to reach in order to get to the ballot, from 5% of signatures to 10% of signatures, from 6 of the congressional districts to all 8 of the congressional districts where you need to get the signatures, from a 50% vote to a 2/3 vote. There's all these different mechanisms that you're using to basically preserve their ability to, make laws unfettered by the threat, potentially, that voters would do something different. That's
Yeah. And
Senator Williams or Cheryl, do you guys disagree?
Yeah, if everyone remembers, once the voters voted Clean Missouri into existence, the first thing that happened when the legislature went back into session is they went to scale and roll it back. My first year in the Senate, I remember the Secretary of the State, Jay Ashcroft, coming to my office and wanting to talk about initiative petition reform. And this all falls within the scope of voter disenfranchisement. I mean, you'll see voter ID laws coming and being evolved and created through this entire process, making it difficult for people to get things on the ballot, making it difficult for, again, like Jeff said, for people to be able to determine what democracy and what our policies in our state look like when the legislature can't get it right on their own. And that's what we're seeing. So, it's something to really watch when you want to make that threshold difficult, where folks have ballot driven initiatives that they want to see. And again, if you think about that this last election cycle, where we passed Clean Missouri, legalized medical marijuana, expanded Medicaid, it was folks that still voted for people who were strongly opposed to that throughout the state, even though those ballot initiatives were overwhelmingly supported throughout the entire state. So, and from a strategy standpoint, I always wondered if maybe we should get an initiative petition to put the issues at the top of the ballot and the candidates at the bottom, so folks could be able to really make create a nexus between the people they're voting for and the issues that align with their personal beliefs. So it's a very convoluted situation. But I think if we created a way to really identify candidates, whoever they are, with issues that they support, I think it'll make the democratic process a lot more clear.
And I think Senator Williams speaks to something that's really sobering, especially for those of us who are big D Democrats, which is the Democratic Party's brand is so damaged in rural Missouri that despite winning the minimum wage for medicinal marijuana, for Medicaid expansion, on 4 of the biggest issues facing the state over the last decade, in some of the same counties where those initiatives passed, Democratic candidates are getting 25, 30, 35% of the votes. And so the brand is certainly very, the party's brand is very damaged, which was, I think explains why Senator Williams suggests that, figuring out ways to raise the profile of some of these issues over the, or better associate leadership around the issues that people in the state have spoken on with the party would probably be a good goal.
I see the one topic that we haven't addressed is teaching truth and history.
So I'm going to give a 30-second update on that, because since we have a sitting senator and a former senator here, I would love to talk a little bit about advocacy. So I'll give you a brief update, and Laura can chime in if she wants to. As we talked about at previous JCRE meetings, let me spotlight myself here. As we've talked about at previous JCRE meetings, this idea of teaching truth and history We knew it's a national phenomenon. People, all states across the country are trying to ban the teaching of what's being called critical race theory. In addition, other bills have been introduced that are trying to introduce something called a parental bill of rights, which would give parents the ability to basically opt out of a variety of different kinds of education that, if they don't want their kids to learn about X, they can pull their kids out or they can review the curriculum. Very, very challenging. The first two bills were heard literally the second week of session. There was probably 75 people who showed up to testify against them. More than any other time, they got more written testimony on that piece of legislation than in history of any other piece of legislation. Because of that outcry and people showing up, they were able to hold the bill over for almost a month, and now they're talking about combining the bills and making them a little more palatable. They're still awful. And that process is going to start up again next week. So they're coming to vote in committee. So JCRC will be putting out an advocacy alert probably on Monday morning with all the committee members' names and phone numbers for you to call and more information. The likelihood is it's going to get voted out of committee. And so then we go to the next part of the process. But advocacy certainly helped to this point, and I think we'll continue to be encouraged to advocate on this.
Just being real, I mean, something pretty bad is going to pass the House committee, and something pretty bad is probably going to pass the House floor. And in the Senate, where the minority party has more ability to, leverage its position through the filibuster and other mechanisms, there's opportunities to, to take some of the most objectionable parts out of the bill. So that's probably what I see happening.
So Sally, I'm going to go off script here and just move us to our next topic, because I want to respect everybody's time. We're only here till 1, and we briefly wanted to talk about advocacy.
Hey, Cheryl, I know, again, and I'm sure Jeff and I have overstayed our welcome.
No, we're thrilled that you're both
could
here.
you talk about, I think it's really important to talk about, and you saw this kind of evolving this week. The state of Missouri doesn't have a health director right now. And because he said that he was in support of vaccines and the state ramping up its vaccine number in terms of people getting vaccinated, his nomination was ultimately derailed by a couple senators that identify as the conservative caucus. Therefore, we didn't move forward through Senate confirmation with his nomination to be the health director in Missouri. So now we don't have one. Did you want to talk about that a little bit? How that is a very dangerous place right now. And to think that we could potentially either have an acting one that's terrified to speak to science because they may lose their job, or we may not get a qualified health director because they don't want to go through that process.
Right. Well, and the other piece to add to that, Senator Williams, is that the governor in his tweeting about this issue basically said he doesn't understand why this particular candidate who had strong Christian values, who, is not pro-mask and not pro-choice, should be defeated by his, other Republicans. So there's a lot of things that are troubling here. One, for the state of our state's public health, and two, for this idea in a pluralistic society that we should be appointing people with certain kinds of Christian values.
Yeah, that was the governor adding to his list of unfortunate things that he said in the past, speaking for someone. I've met this gentleman, and I think that was I think the governor overspoke for his character. This was someone, I'm not going to get into his personal politics or speak for him like the governor did, but I think the governor was doing what he believed was damage control for someone who should have been speaking for himself and speaking to the science.
Brian, can you mention what that banner that the protesters had said on it about vaccines? Because I think it illustrates what you're saying about anti-science.
Was that the banner that they had in the hallways and
When you
everything
sent
else?
out in your newsletter.
Yeah. Oh, they just had all kinds of banners that were basically, I mean, chanting, basically saying that he was wrong for supporting the vaccine. And I mean, it was just very obscene things. Between the crazy things that they were saying and me having to do a self-home test to see if I was positive COVID because these folks didn't wear masks and were anti-vaxxers. I mean, it was a very concerning environment to the extent we had to have Capitol Police involved in that position. But again, that goes back to this crazy bill, Senate Bill 666. These are all policies that concern me being someone in the Capitol that I think we're going to see January 6th all over again. I've never been more terrified or uncomfortable in a building or in a place in my life between the hearing for that bill and watching these folks essentially threaten the life of the state's health director because he spoke to the facts of science and not to the rhetoric that's been put out there around the pandemic.
So
The banner said that the vaccine kills more people than the COVID did. I mean, it was insane. It's anti-science and it has nothing to do with reality.
Yeah, that and the middle finger right behind his head when he took his photo for Senate confirmation. I've never seen anything like that in my life.
Yeah, so I think I'm glad that you've raised this, and it's probably we need to step back, the staff does, and anybody else on this call that might be interested, and maybe we need to put an op-ed together. I think there's something that the Jewish community should be saying about this. We're at 1, so we're not going to get to our last topic, and that's okay. What we wanted to talk about was how we as a group can be advocating. And I was going to have Jeff talk a little bit about the committee process. I've heard him do it. He does a great job about what the stage we're in now and where it's going to go. We're not going to have time for that. Maybe we'll do a different program. But what I do have, and I'll send it out separate in addition to putting the link, we did a poll. It's an anonymous poll. We're trying to figure out how our advocacy tools are working for you. Are you getting our alerts? Are you reading our alerts? Are you taking action from the alerts? Are you taking this information and giving it to the organizations that you're representing so they can put it out? Do we need to be doing Advocacy 101 training? What can we do to make you more effective and to make ourselves more effective as advocates? So I'm going to put, it's an anonymous Google form. I'm going to put the link in the chat, and then we will also send it out to all of the committee members here. So that people who aren't here, so they can respond. We will not be able to determine who responded, so it's anonymous. We want it anonymous so that you know, you'll feel comfortable telling us, no, I don't read your stuff because it's X or Y or whatever. So I'm going to put that in the chat. We'll send it as a follow-up. We'd appreciate if you take a few minutes to open that up, preferably today, and fill it out for us. And Sally, I'm going to let you bring it home.
Then I have to get off mute. This has been a wonderful, wonderful session. I'm grateful to you, Senator Williams, and to you, Jeff. I probably should call you Mr. Smith or Dr. Smith if we're calling him Senator Williams. But thank you. I think this is wonderful. If anybody on the JCRE has information they want to share with us, any of the subcommittees reports, please do so. Send a quick write-up to Cheryl. We'd be grateful for it. And isn't it great to have a session that's so informative that we want going on and on? So thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, everybody else, Alyssa, and we'll see you at the next meeting of the committee of whole. Thank you.